Hello there, welcome to Fridays at Noon. I'm Michael Chen, the executive producer and director for this talk show series. Fridays at Noon is a bi-weekly lunch and learn series that offers education on professional development topics to the University of Denver employees. For more information and to view past videos, please visit du.edu/HR and click on the People Development link. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rest of the show.
And bring your lunch.
Oh, and bring your lunch.
So, welcome to Fridays at Noon, Hiring International Students and Scholars. My name is Laura Buss. I'm the Interim Director and the International Scholar Advisor in International Student and Scholar Services. I'm joined by my colleague.
Hello, my name is Marlene Arnold. I'm Senior International Student Advisor in International Student Scholar Services. Welcome. We're going to be speaking today about hiring international students and scholars. And we'll be starting with the students and moving on to the scholars. But first, we'd like to give an overview of our office. International Student Scholar Services is actually part of the Office of Internationalization. And that is the umbrella. And underneath, we have different units. We have the Associate Provost for Internationalization, the English Language Center, the Center for World Languages and Cultures, Office of International Education, and International Student Scholar Services. So for this purposes, we are going to be speaking about International Student and Scholar Services, otherwise known as ISSS, with 3 of the letter S. And we'll let you know where we're located. We're located in the International House. If you haven't been there, it's about a block east of the main entrance of campus on Warren and Josephine, and we invite you to come. We serve the international students, and we'd like to define that for you, say that the international students are the students here on a student visa. So we're specifically speaking about students that are here on the F1 and J1 student visas. We welcome all other visa categories, but those are the 2 visa types that we actually need to report to the Department of Homeland Security. So when we're speaking about international students, we're not just speaking about anybody from another country or anybody with an accent. So we're specifically speaking about those here as non-immigrants for the purpose of study on a student visa. So they'll be temporarily here and returning to their home country after their degrees. We also serve the international scholars. And you'll be hearing more from Laura about the scholars. And those would be the visiting faculty or staff doing research or teaching here in the United States at DU. Our office assists with immigration advising, but we do so much more. We support the students with cultural adjustment, and we help them navigate the complex rules of the university and learn about the U.S. culture and our society. And as I said, we do a lot more than immigration. We actually have a lot of social and cultural events, and many of them are open to faculty and staff as well. So for example, the international luncheons that we have every month of the quarter, you're welcome to come to those. And then we have food from around the world, and you can meet students, people from around the world. We'll move on to the demographics of who the students are that we are serving. As of last fall, we had 1,527 international students from about 87 different countries, so from all over the world. That was 12.9% of the student population, so it's very exciting to have people from all around the world. The top 10 countries that were represented last year were China, and that is the largest population, India, Canada, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Angola, South Korea, Libya, Norway, and Iran. But again, we have students from many different countries in addition to these that have large groups. So that's just an overview of who our office is and who we serve. And we're going to be talking more specifically about hiring international students and about their different employment authorizations and categories. We're going to start first with on-campus employment. And I do need to specify when we're talking about international students, we're going to be speaking about students on an F1 student visa or a J1 student visa. And those are 2 different categories. We'd be happy to explain further if you contact our office. But for F1 student employment, the F1 students, which is the majority of the international students here at DU, they do not need employment authorization to work on campus. They can work anywhere on campus. It does not have to be in their field of study. They can start from the time they get here. Up to 30 days before the start of their program, they can work on campus. And they can work all the way to the end of their program. So once they complete all their degree requirements, that would be the final day, the end of that quarter, that they're able to work on campus. They do not need authorization from our office. They can just go ahead and work once they find on-campus employment. But they do have limitations to the hours. They can work 20 hours per week or less while school's in session, so during the quarter or semester, and during the official school breaks and the vacation, for example, summer vacation, they can work full-time. So when we're saying 20 hours, it's actually 20 hours total on campus, and that would be even if the student it has 2 on-campus jobs combined. It would be the student's responsibility, but they need to make sure they don't exceed more than 20 hours a week while school's in session. We also want to point out to you that the international students are not eligible for work-study positions. Of course, only people that are in the work-study program are eligible, and since international students aren't eligible for federal financial aid and funding, they were not eligible to participate. So this does affect their ability to find on-campus jobs since there are fewer options available, but they're often very eager to work on campus. F1 students may work off campus, but they must have employment authorization before they can work off campus. And you may meet international students from DU in this category, but you also may have international students from another university, perhaps working here at DU. So for example, maybe somebody is studying at CU Denver, but you hire them here, and they may be following the same rules for employment authorization. To work off campus for an internship is called Curricular Practical Training, or CPT. And again, this is for F1 students on an F1 visa. Here at DU, it could be done differently at different schools, but here at DU, it is authorized by International Student Scholar Services, so it can be done fairly quickly. Students may work part-time, that's 20 hours a week or less, or they can be authorized for full-time, which is anything over 20 hours, 21 hours all the way up to 40 hours. It's very important for CPT that the work is an integral part of their academic curriculums. So we work with the students and the academic advisor to make sure that the employment is an integral part of their academic curriculum. They will actually receive work authorization. They won't receive a work card, which you may see in other cases. They'll receive their immigration document, their I-20, will have a printed authorization on it. So if they're working for DU, so perhaps they have exceeded the 20-hour on-campus limit and they want to work additional hours and are authorized for Curricular Practical Training, or CPT, then they would have an I-20 with the employment authorization on the second page that shows that they're authorized to work for the position. And we authorize it for one academic term at a time. F1 students may also apply for something called Optional Practical Training, or OPT, and that is used usually when they complete their degree. So you may see students who graduate from DU or from another school in the U.S. and want to work at DU on OPT. So it can be before degree completion, but most commonly used after degree completion. They do need to find employment related to their field of study. So an accounting major would need to find work in accounting. They will apply with United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, so they will receive employment authorization in form of a work card. It's called an employment authorization document. So they will have that card to present. And they are eligible up to 12 months of full-time OPT per degree level, per higher degree level. And at the moment, unless things change, at the moment there are specific majors in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, where they are eligible to apply for an extension of an additional 17 months. So that is something the students can work with us and the employer on, and DU is eligible to participate because DU is an E-Verify employer, so they could help the student with that as well. The work is not tied to a particular employer for OPT, so they receive an EAD, a work card, and they can work anywhere in the U.S. as long as it's in their field of study. And so you may be seeing students in your departments on OPT. The last category I'll mention quickly for F1 students is called severe economic hardship. This isn't used commonly. This is really a more severe situation. For example, when we see world events such as the tsunami that hit some countries, or economic crises or government crises in a country, or maybe a student's family business went under, so different situations that they have to document. But if there is severe economic hardship, they could work with our office and then apply with United States Citizenship and Immigration Services to work off campus. And if they are approved, they do not have to work in their field of study. They would receive the EAD that we talked about, and they would be authorized for up to 1 year. They could work 20 hours per week while school's in session and full-time during the breaks. So those are quickly the parts about F1 employment. We do have a section on our website that describes, if I've gone through this rather fast, it has each section broken down. It's under the employment page of our website. The J1 category is different. It'll be a bit shorter, but the J1 exchange visitors have two different types. For on-campus employment, they can also work anywhere on campus. The difference is they actually need written authorization from our office, from ISSS. It's pretty simple, but they would need a prior authorization before working on their immigration document, and in a form of, we also provide a letter as well. So they can work 20 hours per week on campus while school's in session, and full-time during the official breaks and summer or the vacation term. The J1 visitors can work off campus for a few different situations. One would be urgent economic circumstances, which also could be authorized for them to work off campus, and they could work 20 hours per week while class is in session and full-time during breaks. And what I need to mention for the J1 program, the program sponsor is who is able to authorize this employment. So if DU is the program sponsor for this J1 student, then we could authorize it. Some of them may be here through a different program sponsor, and in that case, their program sponsor would need to do the work authorization. Instead of CPT and OPT, like we talked about for F1 students, J1 students have something called academic training, and that can be used both before and after they complete their degree. Again, it's authorized by the program sponsor. So for a DU student that we provided the immigration document for, ISSS could authorize it. The work does need to be related to their field of study. It can be done before or after they complete their degree. The total would be 18 months unless they complete their degree sooner. And if for a PhD, they may be eligible for a program extension for an additional period of 18 months, so possibly up to 36 months for a PhD. So academic training is the type for a J1 student to work off campus. And then J1 students who are married would have a dependent that's in J2 status. Their status depends on the J1 following the immigration rules and being in status. And actually the J2s are eligible to apply for work authorization as well. This is a big benefit for the people in the J category because it's not possible for the F category. So J2s, the spouses, can apply for work authorization through United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, and they would receive an EAD, their work card as well, to work periods usually of 1 year. And we do see this at times. They might be looking for a job at DU. I did have someone the other day who is receiving authorization, and then his question on the spouse was like, well, how do I find a job, and where do I find a job? So you may be encountering some people in J2 status as well. Since there's a lot of information to remember, please use our office as a resource and contact us. But we also have some things on our website you may want to be aware of. We have an on-campus employer documentation site on our website, which is du.edu/ISSS. There's an on-campus hiring checklist, which is very helpful. It's under the employment section and then the forms page. There's a section for on-campus employers. There's also a sample letter for you to give to the student when they're applying for a social security number. And we have a template that is really recommended because it includes the items needed. Sometimes if students don't have those items and they go to the Social Security Administration, they could get denied and have to go back. So we do have these resources for you on our website under the employment page form section. The next step after hiring would be for the student to complete their I-9, and those questions would be answered and be completed by shared services. And taxation questions, also often students have those questions, particularly there's different tax treaties, so different countries have different situations, and those would be handled by payroll that's also located in shared services. So thank you for listening to the international student portion, and we are going to move on to speak about international scholars.
So you've heard so far about the F's and the J's, and those are only two of the alphabet and an entire alphabet soup that we deal with in immigration. The categories actually start with A, go all the way to V. Haven't had any new ones recently, so I'm just waiting to see what happens when we get to Z. But F and J are the most common ones you'll run into, but we also have a population of international scholars on campus. Last year, between July 2014 and June 2015, which is our reporting period, there were 119 international scholars on campus, coming from 28 different countries, more than half of them from the People's Republic of China. They were hosted by 27 different academic units, and that includes a whole range of people, from a visiting researcher or lecturer who might be here for a short time, all the way through a postdoctoral researcher to a teaching assistant professor and other tenure track faculty. So it really covers a broad range of people. An international student or scholar who comes to campus, we call a non-immigrant. And a non-immigrant is anyone who is not a U.S. citizen or not a U.S. permanent resident. And I mentioned all those different categories, including F and J, but we're going to talk about a few more. The intent of a non-immigrant is temporary. As Marlene mentioned, the students who come here in student immigration status have the intent to leave the United States when they're finished. Obviously, that can change while they're here, but initially their intent is to leave. So generally, the people who are here as non-immigrants in those scholar categories may have a temporary appointment or a short-term appointment, but it also can change to permanent or indefinite employment, because in our office, I also handle permanent residency for faculty and staff at the university. So I file the applications for people to become U.S. permanent residents. I'm going to go over a couple of categories that you might run into. First is the tourist category, and there are actually two categories of tourists. There are the people who have to go to U.S. consulates to apply for visas in order to come as tourists. And then there are people from countries called visa waiver countries that have been identified as low-risk countries, and they are able to come to the United States without visiting a U.S. consulate or embassy and getting a visa in their passport, and come in to the United States for a temporary purpose. So they could either be a W-2, a WT or a WB, or a B1 or a B2. Those are just the names of the different tourist categories for business and pleasure. And you might see them come in to deliver a lecture. They cannot be employees, they cannot be paid, but they can accept honoraria. Then we have the J1 exchange visitor, and the university is authorized by the U.S. Department of State for a number of different categories, the student category that Marlene talked about, but also short-term scholars, researchers, professors, specialists, and student interns. And these are all people who might come to the university on a more temporary basis to conduct research or teach. They can be authorized for employment. Some of them are visiting researchers. They might be on a scholarship from their home country or a sabbatical from their home country, so their funding is not from DU. And others come as DU employees, for example, a postdoctoral researcher or a visiting teaching assistant professor. Their activities must be temporary, so that means they cannot be in tenure track positions. They could temporarily fill in a temporary track, oh gosh, can't get it out, a tenure track faculty position while that faculty member is on sabbatical or absent from the university. Some of the people in the J1 exchange visitor category have a requirement to return home for 2 years, so this is something when I'm talking to departments about bringing someone in that we talk about in terms of long-term plans and not having an obstacle. Marlene mentioned F1 or J1 students that might become employees of the university after completing their studies. They could either be DU students or students from other universities who come in. And we might also see then curricular practical training or optional practical training for F1 students or J1 students on academic training. There's also a category called TN, Trade NAFTA. It was negotiated as part of the NAFTA agreement between the US, Canada, and Mexico. It created an immigration category that allows Canadian and Mexican citizens to come to the US and work in certain fields. There is a list of fields. It does include teaching at the university level and also some research. So we use that occasionally. It's a nice category because the person basically gets approved for it at the port of entry, so either at the border crossing or the airport where they enter the US, and they can be authorized to work for 3 years, and really based on a letter from the university department. So it's a really easy one to use compared to some of the others. We also have the H-1B temporary worker. This is for specialty occupations, which means it has to be a position that at least requires a bachelor's degree or anything higher. And it allows people to work in more longer-term positions. It has a 6-year time limit. We do have to file a petition with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which right now is taking more than 4 months, so this is not a quick process. But I work with departments to apply for that for researchers, for people in teaching positions, and also staff positions. We do have to meet salary requirements, so when I'm helping departments, I investigate whether the DU salary will meet the Department of Labor requirements that we're obligated to follow. And there is an application fee of $825. The other categories that I've talked about are free. Departments don't have to pay fees for them. There is also a category called O1 for workers of extraordinary ability. I've actually, in the 13 years I've been here, never used it, but there are some circumstances where it makes sense, and we have to put together all of this information to show how wonderful the person is, what kind of important research they're doing, and that is an option too. I mentioned before that I apply for permanent residence for certain employees of the university. This is generally a 3-step process. The first step is with the U.S. Department of Labor and requires us to advertise the position according to Department of Labor standards, and in teaching positions show that through a competitive process we have chosen the best qualified person. If it is a non-teaching position, we have to show that there are no readily available and minimally qualified U.S. workers. So it doesn't work for some positions where there's a broad pool of qualified applicants. So that first step, labor certification, is with the Department of Labor. If that is successful, then I file a petition with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services called an immigrant petition, or Form I-140, to get approval from USCIS to hire a person permanently. And then finally, the person has to file their own application with the Immigration Service to become a permanent resident, which is their own personal application. If we want to skip labor certification, the whole process where we have to advertise and attest that we've hired either the best person or that there are no minimally qualified U.S. workers, for teaching faculty or researchers, we can use an outstanding professor and researcher category. It's a little bit like the O1 in that I, with the help of the person, collect all of this documentation about how wonderful they are and what kind of research they're doing. It's really kind of interesting for me. I get a little lost when it's the STEM people because it's hard to understand what they're doing. A little easier when we're working with social scientists and others, but it's fascinating to see the quality of the faculty here at DU and to look at the research they're doing and the things they're discovering, and we put all of this into a petition, in some cases that might be 2 or 3 inches tall, and send it to the Immigration Service. And the Immigration Service then decides if the person is truly outstanding and can become a U.S. permanent resident. So that's a few more categories to that alphabet soup. Just in terms of the people being employees or perhaps not employees, if you're hiring a non-immigrant as an employee, then what they're eligible for in terms of benefits is the same as any other person that you would hire in terms of health benefits, retirement, those sorts of things. If it's a non-employee, for example, a visiting researcher who's coming to the university to collaborate with a faculty member or access our resources for their own research, then they're eligible for some limited benefits. Human Resources has a form called the Special Community Member Form that the host department can complete on behalf of the visitor. It gets them an ID number so they can get a Pioneer ID card. It allows them use of the library, access to the wireless network, and gives them official status on campus without the benefit of employee benefits. As Marlene mentioned before, I-9s are completed through shared services, and taxation questions for employees are handled by payroll and shared services. That is not something that our office deals with. Just one mention on the use of outside counsel. So I can file create the forms for the J1 category. I file for H's. I help with TNs, O's, the permanent residency. But in some cases, some department or an individual employee might choose to use outside immigration counsel. If the employee is paying, that's fine. There's no special permission. But if university funds are being used to pay an outside attorney, then that has to go through university legal counsel. ISSS does reserve the right to refer to outside counsel in certain circumstances. If we encounter something, or I encounter something that I feel like I'm not able to handle, that can happen too. So here's the benefit to International Student and Scholar Services: free advice anytime. Call me if you have any questions. Free assistance with all of the non-immigrant categories that I talked about: J's, F's, TNs, O's, and any others that we might encounter. I do charge $500 to university departments for the permanent residency. It's a little bit longer and more involved process. I am happy to meet with prospective employees. This can be a recruiting tool. A lot of universities offer the same services that ISSS does, but not all of them. And so it's very comforting for a prospective employee to hear how we can help with that immigration process. And I'm also happy to come and meet with university units and talk about what our services are and how we can help. And this is useful for search committees and deans and department heads who might have questions. So you'll find our contact information on our website, so feel free to call me. One question that comes up a lot that I'm going to address before Marlene goes into some cultural and language considerations when hiring international students and scholars is interview questions. How do you find out what somebody's immigration status is, or whether you need to be prepared for this? And this is regulated because we have to be careful about discrimination. But a couple questions that you can ask are you authorized to work indefinitely in the U.S. for any employment? Or you can ask, will you need sponsorship from DU for a work visa now or in the future? And this helps you figure out who might need assistance and who might not. You cannot ask specific questions about current immigration status, about nationality, about where they're from, and that sort of thing. But these are specific questions that address that immigration issue.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for your attention to the part of the presentation that's about rules, regulations, the immigration side, which is really important and complex. And we're available for questions because we just kind of touched and highlighted different things. But we want to move on kind of briefly to the part about the language and culture in different aspects, which is actually a lot more fun than the immigration rules and piece of it. This part is going to be short, just really to get you thinking about some topics and maybe raising some questions or discussions within your department or with our department. We're not going to be able to cover it all right now, and that would probably be another training or more to have a cross-cultural training and discussion. But what we wanted to say is that when you are hiring international students, you'll probably notice a lot of different topics that come up, and we just wanted to mention a few of them. For many of the student workers or international employees, English may not be their first language, so they may be speaking English as a second language. And they may not be familiar with some of the vocabulary and slang or idioms that are being used. They also, you'll see when they apply, they may not be using the American format of a resume. They may be using a CV, a curriculum vitae, and that has different parameters. For example, in a U.S. resume, you don't put your picture and biographical information, and it has a certain format, but it could look very different for the CV. They also could have different nonverbal communications. So one of the things you'll notice is the eye contact. For some cultures, especially in the U.S., we value direct eye contact, and for some other cultures, that actually may be a sign of disrespect. Direct eye contact for some cultures is a sign of respect, particularly somebody older or a different higher up in terms of respect or status, to not make direct eye contact. So this is something you'll notice in the workplace as well, that may come up when working with international employees. They also may be coming from a culture where silence is valued. And this is something to be aware of. Maybe it's a personality trait, but maybe it's a cultural difference. And we'd be happy to explore these different topics with you, or maybe even do a cross-cultural training for your department, or a specific topic. Last year we did have a couple cross-cultural simulations. It was called ASARIMA, which is America spelled backwards, and we did a simulation of for faculty and staff of what international students experience, all the different steps and obstacles they have to go through before coming to the U.S., and we had a debrief after, which brought up a lot of topics. So there's different avenues to explore this further. Some additional cultural considerations is they may be coming from a culture where the group is valued more than the individual. Of course, it differs in the U.S., but in general, here in the United States, we're known as a very individualistic culture, and so you'll see that also in their work, depending where they're from. They may be from a culture where asking different people the same question is how the system works. You'll notice some cultural differences when people keep asking a question until they get the answer they're looking for, and it really could be a cultural difference. Also, some cultures, they really place a high value on relationships, even more than rules and regulations. So that could be something you'll notice could be done differently depending on the person and their culture. Just a few little tips to think about for cross-cultural communication is to be mindful when you're using American idioms and expressions. I don't say to avoid them. I actually say use them, but then just be aware, and then use that as a great opportunity to explain it to the person. If you're going to use some slang or idiom, it's a great learning opportunity, but don't just assume that they understand what you're saying. If you stop and think about it, you'll notice how full your vocabulary is of these idioms and expressions that we use, that every culture has and their language has in their country. So paraphrasing discussions could be very helpful. If you, after speaking with someone, working with them, you could have them you could paraphrase what you said, and also ask them to summarize things to make sure that they understood what you told them. That you're it's another expression we use, on the same page, right? Consider differences based on a person's culture. So something that took me a little bit to get used to is some cultures, they may say yes when they mean no. It might be a few examples. In some cultures, maybe it's appropriate to say no, yes, if they don't understand something, because they, maybe if you're in a position of a rank or authority and they don't want to say no. So I've had students, for example, tell me yes when I ask them questions, and then they'll go and tell someone else, like, what did she say, or I don't understand. And I thought I explained it clearly, but sometimes it could be a cultural difference, and they seek out other people to consult. Also,
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just thinking how many times I was guilty of that. If you've ever lived or traveled in a place where you don't speak the language and you're speaking a second language, it's really easy to nod your head and say yes when you haven't caught it all, or maybe you think you caught it, but you didn't really catch it. So it is so important to check understanding. A
couple other examples is in some cultures, maybe they would say no a few times before saying yes. So if someone, this isn't necessarily the workplace, okay, maybe it's a work lunch. Would you like some more food? No. If you say that to me as American, I'm going to think that's what you mean. I'm going to take it directly. You don't want any. But in some cultures, they actually are supposed to decline 2 or 3 times before accepting, just as a to be polite. So there are some big differences. I also discovered working with some cultures, even the nonverbal. I'm used to shaking your head up and down for yes and side to side for no, and then there's some that may have different head motions that I was looking at them and they were saying one thing, but their head was showing me something else in my cultural frame. So that is something to be aware of. So really just develop an awareness. Notice differences in terms of how you speak, what you're saying, and then even the nonverbal, as we talked about, the eye contact, but also personal space. You'll see in some cultures we stand closer together or farther apart, depending on where we're from. And just imagine being in their shoes and studying or working in a different country and culture, in a different language, all the way across the world, and just think about that. And what we really want to end on here is that the international student workers, international employees, the scholars, can be great assets to the workplace. They have so much that they can offer, and just a few things is flexibility. If they can come across the world and adapt to the culture here, they can be flexible also in the workplace. Adaptability, as we said, the culture and the different ways of navigating a new system, a new country and culture. The cross-cultural experience, they can contribute and add so much to your workplace and perspectives, to the way you're doing things in your office or to your team and your discussions. Another language can be a great benefit as well. And as we said, just the worldview they bring, the perspective being from somewhere else, and not just assuming things are done just the way we're doing them here, and much, much more. But instead of, sometimes I worry that international students think of the maybe more the deficiencies of, English isn't my first language, and I have these immigration rules and restrictions and things, but then we really want to look at it as an asset model instead of deficiency model of all these other things that they can contribute in addition. And so as we close, we're available, and we're also part of a team, an ISSS that's available for questions by phone, by email. If you'd like to set up an appointment for a meeting with in your department or our department. Our website has a wealth of information on it, including some information about employment. And for students, to just let them know, we have advising hours we call quick question hours. We have a schedule on our website for them to come in with no appointment needed for quick questions. And we also have appointment hours where they can book an appointment. So some of the things we were telling you about, so you could understand the context and how things work for the employment for F1, J1, and all the other categories you mentioned. But a lot of it, especially the students, it would be their responsibility to follow the immigration regulations, apply for work authorization if needed, and such. So what you can do is refer them to our office, and that would be a huge help so that they would get the information directly from us. So we're really...
Advising by friends is not recommended. Better to come directly to us.
Yes. So we want to thank you for your time, and I'll let Laura.
Yes, thank you for joining us, and join us again in 2 weeks for Fridays at noon.